The ship will sink.
You're certain?
Certain? Yes.
Yeah.
In an hour or so.
Welcome to episode 4. This episode's topic is the RMS Titanic. The Titanic movie from the 90s is my favorite movie of all time. The history behind what really happened is crazy. The RMS Titanic was built in Belfast. The architect or shipbuilder was Thomas Andrews, portrayed in the movie by the lovely Victor Garber. Thomas Andrews is my boy. Thomas Andrews wanted the Titanic to have 40-something lifeboats, enough to carry every single person who would be on board. But he was overruled. The Titanic ends up being launched for its maiden voyage in April 1912 with over 2,200 passengers. 800 or 900 of them are crew members. The next largest group is third-class passengers, then first-class passengers, and then the smallest group is second-class passengers. The number of actual lifeboats on the ship when it launches is 14 regular lifeboats and like a couple of weird collapsible ones. So the total is less than half of what Thomas Andrews said they should have had. But technically, it met the law at the time. The law was very outdated and weird. The number of lifeboats required on a ship was determined by the weight of the ship, not by the total capacity, which doesn't make any sense. The Titanic was designed to basically be a floating Ritz, like the Ritz Hotel. It was absolutely stunning. You know, you've got the famous grand staircase, and they had a swimming pool and all kinds of stuff. And the private rooms were amazing. And that's why it attracted so many wealthy and famous folks. That includes millionaire Benjamin Guggenheim. That includes the richest man on the ship, John Jacob Astor, an American millionaire. That includes Dorothy Gibson. She was a silent film actress. Oh, and the owner of Macy's was on the Titanic. The owner of the Titanic was J.P. Morgan, and he was not on board the ship. But the largest group of people on the ship were immigrants hoping to start a better life in America. Most of them were from Britain, Ireland, or like Northern Europe, Scandinavia. J. Bruce Ismay was the managing directors of the White Star Line who operated the Titanic. On its maiden voyage, J. Bruce Ismay was on the Titanic. A lot of people involved with the ship were on board because it was a maiden voyage. Ismay had the audacity to suggest early in the building of the ship that it would not need so many boats, that it would look bad, it was unnecessary. So even though Thomas Andrews wanted it to have 40-something lifeboats, they ended up going with 14 regular lifeboats and a couple of collapsible, and that was largely because of Ismay. I don't like him. The captain chosen by the White Star Line for Titanic's maiden voyage is Captain Edward Smith. He was a very well-known captain at that time and considered one of the best. A few days after launching from Southampton and having stopped a couple other places in Western Europe, the Titanic is now in the middle of the North Atlantic, dead south of Newfoundland. And in the middle of the night, 11-something, the guys who were looking for icebergs spot icebergs, but it's way too late. So the ship is trying to turn, but it's just so darn big that it can't. And it sort of bumps along the iceberg. The iceberg does not actually puncture the ship, make holes in it. Instead, what it does is it pushes it, dents it. And so eventually that buckled, and that's how the water got into the ship. Now, the ship was built, as Thomas Andrews would have told you, to withstand up to 4 of the watertight compartments near the bottom of the ship being flooded with water. Unfortunately, when it hit the iceberg and buckled and water came in, 5 of those compartments totally flooded. And so immediately when Thomas Andrews is summoned to meet with Captain Smith and Bruce Ismay, they realize that there's nothing they can do. The ship is inevitably going to sink. As the ship starts to sink, so it starts to sink into the water like this, they launch a women and children only protocol to get women and children onto the lifeboats. First class passengers more easily access the lifeboats. The third class passengers, and remember this is like the middle of the night at this point, they're lower in the ship and they're not being given the same support. They're largely left to fend for themselves, the third class passengers. And so as the ship begins to sink and the lower parts of the ship are flooded, a lot of them get trapped. It's complete chaos. And that's why so many more third class passengers die than first class. The Titanic starts sending out distress signals. And the nearest ship is the SS Californian. And this ship, for some reason, ignores the Titanic's distress call and does not come to its aid. And so the next ship who hears this distress code, the one that does try to come to its aid, Carpathia. But the Carpathia is really far away, so they're not going to make it in time. Because Thomas Andrews is like, the ship is sinking now, like it's going to be gone in like an hour or two, according to Thomas Andrews. And the Carpathia is like, we can't be there for like 4 or 5 hours. So they know at this point they're kind of on their own for a while. By the way, that SS Californian ship, a lot of people were angry about what happened because it didn't come and try to rescue the people in the Titanic, and it could have. A lot of people were angry at the captain of that ship, although he didn't have any legal action taken against him. But what's interesting is the SS Californian is actually sunk by the Germans in World War I. Only about 700 people get on lifeboats. Most of them are women and children. The people who don't get on a lifeboat are mostly men, but there are plenty of women who don't get on lifeboats as well. Many of the crew members don't get on lifeboats. All of the lifeboats are launched with less than what their actual capacity is. So those regular lifeboats, of which there were 14, they could take like 65 adults each, and most of them were launched with less than that. But this is largely because the crew was not properly trained. They just did not think that this could happen, and the laws were so outdated that they just didn't prepare the crew for what to do if they needed to launch these lifeboats. A lot of the famous rich people that I mentioned as being in first class were men and were not part of that protocol. Benjamin Guggenheim, he is supposedly last seen wearing his fancy clothes, like smoking cigars and stuff, because he knows he's going to die. He went out like a straight G. John Jacob Astor, the richest man in the ship, he knows he's going to die. Bruce Ismay gets on one of the last lifeboats to leave, and a lot of people were really angry at him because it was his notion that the Titanic didn't need so many lifeboats, and yet he's going to get on one when there's so many passengers who couldn't get on one in time. He survives the sinking of the Titanic. The media, the press in both the UK and America absolutely destroy this guy. They call him the coward of the Titanic, and he has to live with that for the rest of his life. I hate him. So as the ship is sinking and going like this, the front's completely underwater now, the back's going up and up and up and up. And so they're launching the last of the lifeboats, and the lifeboats trying to get away from the ship so they don't get pulled under. People are trying to hang on, basically, to anything that they can. On the deck of the ship, inside the ship, they're just trying to stay out of the water as long as they can. So as the ship goes up like this, eventually it breaks in half. And we now know that the ship fully broke in half. And it hit the bottom of the Atlantic in 2 separate places. As it goes like this, it finally breaks, and then this goes, and then like this, and then it bobs for a little while, and then eventually it goes down. All in all, it takes about 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to sink to the bottom of the North Atlantic. Thomas Andrews did not survive, and he was hailed as actually a hero because he was seen by many, many survivors trying to help people, going around telling people, get on a lifebelt, go to a lifeboat, go, 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 don't delay, this is serious, go now. And he spent a lot of his last moments trying to help other people, and he did not get on a lifeboat. So he's kind of the opposite as Bruce Ismay. Captain Smith goes down with the ship, which is custom. It was custom then, and it's still custom now, for the captain to go down with the ship. And it would have been seen as rather heinous if he had stepped foot onto a lifeboat. So he did not do that. So we've got about 700 people in lifeboats sort of floating over there. The actual Titanic has broken in two and both have sunk. So we've got like 1,500 people either stuck in the ship that sank or floating in the water. The water, oh my God, it was, April in the North Atlantic. The water was below freezing temperatures. Those people floating in the water, majority of them did not survive minutes in that water. You'd get like cardiac arrest, or just the cold in general just completely shuts down your body. And so the vast majority of those people die. Okay, the Carpathia arrives like a couple hours after the Titanic sinks. They get the 700 people in the lifeboats, and then they go to see the people like floating in the water, wearing a life belt or holding the debris. And they only pull five people alive out of the water. So about 710 people survived. So 1,500 people out of 2,200 died. And this makes the Titanic one of the deadliest commercial ocean liner disasters in history. And it also is the second largest ocean liner to ever sink in history. Although the number one ship that was bigger than the Titanic ocean liner that sank, only like 30 people died. So it is not famous in the way that Titanic is famous. The silent film actress Dorothy Gibson survived the sinking, and literally later that year, she starred in a silent film about the Titanic, playing herself. She even wore the dress that she wore the day that the Titanic sank, which is crazy. Too soon. However, in 1914, a fire, I think it was a fire, destroyed the film, so the movie doesn't exist anymore, which is such a shame. The legacy of the Titanic, it made a huge difference in maritime safety law. So after the Titanic, they realized we have to update the laws about how many lifeboats the ships need to have and some other things like that. So they established this new set of maritime laws that have been updated over the years, but are still largely in existence even today, and it's considered like one of the most important things governing maritime safety. In 1985, the wreck of the Titanic was discovered at the bottom of the Atlantic. They were looking for something else, but the guy in charge said, well, if I have extra time, can I look for the Titanic too? And then they found the Titanic. They have been able to take a lot of artifacts from the Titanic and bring it to the surface, preserve it in museums. I've seen a lot of it. They have not been able to move the actual ship, and the ship is deteriorating rapidly. The iron that the ship is made out of is dwindling away, and so within 20 years the Titanic will basically be gone. Today there are no survivors of the Titanic still alive. I remember reading about a 2-month-old baby who survived the Titanic, and she lived to be 97, but she died 10 years ago. The area that the Titanic was in the water when it hit the iceberg is now today known as Iceberg Alley for obvious reasons.